Namaste, everybody. This is another episode of Future Ed Curriculum Designs podcast, and today we are taking a little leap beyond the IB and the international curriculum, and we are actually turning back home. In with us, we have Hariji and Namrata ji, and they are part of Vyuha Learning Labs, and they've done some excellent work. They are working on Indian knowledge system and contemporary education, something that is I hold very close to my heart because I'm also wanting to learn about it. And they design blueprints rooted in the Indian worldview, and they are developing rigorous and relevant educational models, curricula, and the structures that sustain them. And Hariji and Namrataji, if you could tell us something about yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much for having us. It's always a pleasure and enriching, actually, to dialogue about learning and um, what it means to us and some of the pressing questions that concern us around it.
Mhm.
So, thank you so much for having us. Really appreciate your invite. So, I think I'm a storyteller. I love being with kids. That's what started me into this journey. And while I was at it, though I dabbled with some social sector organizations, curriculum development, teacher training,
Mhm.
facilitation, that was the same time around when I also drew closer towards the Indian culture and all the philosophies of the land, where I started getting answers to some of the questions I held very deeply, to some of the practices at home, some of the things that I was being told to do.
Mhm.
I was not happy with the answers I got, but
Mhm.
slowly and steadily, the books, the talks, the platform, especially Chinmaya Mission, where I joined as a volunteer, really helped me seek and inquire into some of these questions. And I think that is really the seed to all the seeking that followed. And in that quest, a lot of coming forth of whatever I'm experiencing, learning is obviously the work that we are trying to do through Vyuha. So we don't see it as a separate or binary at all. It's actually one stream coming from the seeking that we do very earnestly, and we try to. It's very natural. We can't just keep it within. We have
Mhm.
to share, and
Absolutely.
that's what
I,
we
I
look
agree,
for.
Hariji.
Mhm.
Namrataji.
Yeah, I think it's a very similar journey, Tanya ji. So, I think so. I'm a Mumbai girl. I grew up, did my schooling, chartered accountancy, did a bit of work in some consulting way back in the day.
Mhm.
And on one such, we have these breaks, right? You get a summer break or whatever.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I happened to visit Uttarakhand, and a little towards the north, I went to Badrinath for the first time. It was the
Mhm.
first yatra I'd ever had in my life, and I actually happened to visit a cave, and I was told that that is the cave where one of the earliest scientists of our land,
Mhm.
Vyasa Maharishi,
Ah.
happened to write some of the most important works of this land. I also happened to see some of the bridges that the Pandavas. We know of the Mahabharata.
Mhm.
There's an important bridge in the area of Badrinath Dham,
Right.
which is happened to have built by the Pandavas. So around that time, I felt like there was a huge shock that I was experiencing. I had been inhabiting this land called India um, for more than 20 years. I knew nothing. For
Mhm.
me, some of these stories were just, maybe that I had no idea that they actually happened.
Happened.
I had no idea that there were living relics, there were living traditions, practices that are there in this land. What does this land even represent? What does the wisdom of this land even represent? I
Mhm.
think this particular incident really shook me a lot.
Mhm.
And thereafter, I think I was one thing led to another. I was very, fortunate to meet my teacher, Sri Raghu Anantanarayanan. He is a direct disciple of Yogacharya Krishnamacharya. Krishnamacharya is said to be the father of modern yoga. We all know of Shri Pattabhi Joyce, we know of Iyengar,
PK Sayangar.
PKS Iyengar, and Shri Krishnamacharya is actually their teacher. He's the first one to have taken yoga to the world, to
Right.
introduce yogic techniques to women in a
Mm,
very, very useful and a very nuanced way, I would say.
mm,
And I am very blessed to have been learning and practicing yoga with some of his disciples. So thereafter, going into the Indian traditions, going into the Indian philosophy was no longer a pet project.
mm,
I think it has this magnetic
yes.
pull
Yeah.
influence on us. It's
Yeah.
not just something you'll do on the weekends.
Right.
And yeah, I think I took it upon myself to really discover what it means to live the Indian way,
Mm,
especially through yoga. So I think thereafter, it was very obvious that some of this has to start from the roots, which is children. There was
mm,
no point in working with adults. I think I
mm.
myself feel very disconnected with adults. I think it's very nice to be with children and really influence that space of society.
I agree with you when you say disconnected with adults. I mean, just drawing from personal, I'm just going to quote a few things of my own. I belong to the Bengal zone, right?
Yeah.
I'm from West
Yeah.
Bengal. So here we talk about, I mean, we are so anglicized, right?
Mm.
Mm.
So, this kind of cultural understanding, the need for cultural understanding and spiritual understanding, came to me very late. So the
Mm.
idea of the disconnect that spiritual things only are a part of people who are aged and not and people of younger age should. I mean, that is so bizarre. So
Yeah.
that has to go. And when you say that, you have to talk to children, obviously the children should be without really putting tags as spirituality,
Yeah.
just the learning of what life is meant to be, right? So I absolutely agree and align with you. You.
Thank you.
When we come to today's classroom, I would just want to, talk about it. So what is the epistemic utility of Indian knowledge system that you can, look like in how can it look like in the classrooms?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would like to take this. I
Sure.
think what IKS is concerned about is, the question of what is a valid source of knowledge itself, or how does one know what
Mm,
one knows. I
mm,
think it's a very what we today refer to as metacognition.
mhm,
If we were to look at it as the origin of label, of course it was labeled so much later, but
mhm.
we have something called the Pramana Shastra in Indian knowledge system, which
Okay.
is to do with understanding the valid sources of knowledge. So there is something like that in our philosophy, in our land, which
Mhm,
says, the one way to know anything, to get to the truth of anything, is through direct perception,
mhm,
through the senses, through the windows of the technology of our senses.
mhm,
Right? We all constantly absorb, we take in information from the world. So
mhm,
that is direct perception. That's one form of knowing. Another is inference.
mhm,
We often perceive something, but using that perception, we infer something else.
mhm,
For example, we can look at smoke from somewhere and we can infer that there's fire there, even if we don't perceive it directly,
mhm,
right? Then we have, also the authoritative word of a teacher, or let's say of a book, or
mhm,
of a collective of intelligent intellectuals.
mhm,
So, I would say that the epistemic utility is not just to describe how learning is happening,
mhm,
or what will be an effective way to teach.
mhm.
What is true knowledge itself? I think that was a fundamental pursuit of learning and education in India. And I think that's what is unique in this land.
Right. Namrata ji, would you want to add?
Yeah, yeah. So just to add to this, I think in today's classrooms, right? If we were to just see, I don't know, meaning I think IB kids are a lot smarter. or a lot, opening their minds to multiple things. But if you
Right.
just go to any general class today, you will ask them, what do you think is Newton's laws, or what do you think is gravity, what do you think is force?
Mhm.
Some equation will come to you,
Mm. Mm.
which means that a particular law of nature, a force of nature, is only valid in thought. It is
Yes.
not something that is that one is able to perceive in one's reality. It
Mm.
is not something that one is able to apply to, in a sense, manipulate objects around oneself.
Mm.
And how do we say that we are creating scientists without creating a scientific sense of thinking?
Mm.
So moving away from just textual understanding or abstraction to
Mm.
really being able to observe phenomenon and thereby apply it.
Mm.
As Hari shared, moving away from just textbooks, just shabda, that is all of the textual understanding,
Mm.
really using that for inferences, using that for direct perception. Is
To
that
make
even
to make sense of your surroundings with that idea in mind, right? Yes, absolutely. I
exactly?
understand. Can I ask you a question? I'm really intrigued because I have so much to talk about. So, Pramana Shastra, where can one find it and how can one read it, or how long back was it, penned down or written?
Sure.
Yeah. So
Any
there
idea?
is,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Tell me.
So there's no one text called Pramana Shastra. Many people call the Nyaya Shastra, which is
Ah.
one of the darshanas,
Mm-hmm.
to be a Pramana Shastra.
Okay.
So maybe I can do a quick recap.
Sure.
The Indian texts have six standpoints or six vantage points of reality, which they
Okay.
call the darshanas.
Okay.
Like literally, like when you say darshan, what do you
Mm-hmm.
mean by darshan, right? It's a view. You are looking
Yes.
at something.
Right.
So in the Indian land, you can look at the same thing through six lenses.
Oh, okay.
Mind you, this is not just to do with God or some
No,
esoteric thing.
no,
Not at
It's,
anything.
all. Not at
yeah,
all. Just about
yeah.
life and how you perceive life, right? That's
What we can refer to today as worldview and the view of self
uh-huh.
can be both tethered to what we refer to as darshana.
So
Absolutely.
one such darshana is
Mm-hmm.
the Nyaya darshana, which is a law. You can look at the world through logic.
Mm-hmm.
So logic is said to be the Pramana Shastra.
Mm-hmm.
However, each darshana, that is each of the worldviews, has its own pramanas
Oh,
as well.
okay.
So logic, that is Nyaya Shastra, will
Mm-hmm.
have a combination, will have maximum number of pramanas because it its main emphasis on understanding the world is through an epistemic lens.
Right.
Uh, but even the other philosophies will have some other pramanas or some lesser pramanas, as the case may be.
Right. Does one have to be very conversant with Sanskrit, or do you have English versions of this as well? Because a lot of us are not aware. So if you could kind of help us, maybe you can, tell us about a few books. If you don't have anything in mind right now, you can share it later as well. So, are
Yeah,
there, there are,
there are
right?
a lot of books. There are a lot of books. We
So, Professor Mahadevan has written the Introduction to Indian Knowledge Systems book, which
Okay.
is meant for engineering students. It's a gamut of all things IKS. In
Mm.
that, there is a section for pramanas where it's given in a very succinct and understandable, comprehensible way
Mhm.
for today, for anybody today, wanting to learn about this.
Lovely.
And primarily, see, if we were to say when this originated, anybody in Indian knowledge system who has written any
Mhm.
treatise or some work of wisdom,
Mhm.
they never attribute it to themselves. They only say they have collected this wisdom and has, for this time and context,
Mhm.
represented it in this way, which to them is very contextual and intelligent. right? So it has
Yeah,
always been there. These
right,
are universal principles.
right,
Somebody has come in touch with them and
mm,
has given it in this form that we refer to it as pramanas today.
right. So, coming back as an IB teacher in international
Yes.
education, so it's so I mean, I'm so what should I say? I feel that I'm very ignorant about what Indian knowledge system is all about because in IB there's something called TOK. It's
Yeah.
called theory of knowledge. So we already
Mhm.
had that in our
Yes.
text. There's something called experiential learning that you talked about. There's something
Yes.
called inferential learning. We have workshops, we have webinars, of people outside India talking about these, where we already have that wealth of treasure of this idea in IKS. So
Mhm.
this is very interesting, and I really find myself ignorant because I didn't know about this before you came in. So thank you for doing that. Maybe I'm going to take up and read the things that you recommend.
Definitely.
Absolutely. So
Whenever we do speak to teachers from the IB world, we do refer to the TOK and we say, hey, did you know that something called Pramanas existed even
Mhm.
before IB and pretty
Of
much
course.
spoke the same thing? Right?
Right.
And that is actually an intriguing statement for them, and that draws also people in, hooks them to wanting to know more about it, actually.
Mm. Okay. So let's talk about the Panchakosha Vikas in a way that a school teacher can practically understand and apply. So if you could shed some light on that.
Sure. So, any topic that we take, for example, in mathematics, if we were to teach ratio proportions, which usually is taught, I think, in primary grades.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are the Panchakoshas? Okay, let me step a little back and go into the Panchakoshas itself. It's a framework, a blueprint to understanding a being in a complete sense. And that means we are made of multiple dimensions, all of it coming together, interconnected, making us a whole being. And what are those dimensions? We have a physical layer, the outermost, the Annamaya, made of the food sheath. This is to do with all the skin, the structure, the bones, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that we do with the tangible body
Mm-hmm.
is to do with the Annamaya Kosha. Then comes the Pranamaya, which is to do with the physiology, everything, the involuntary functions of the body, be it digestion, respiration, etc., which helps sustain this body. Manomaya is to do with the mind, the substance of the mind, the thoughts, the emotions, etc. And Vijnanamaya is subtler. So think of it as concentric circles, each within another, or probably a Russian doll, one within another.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we can visualize this model. The
Mm-hmm.
Vijnanamaya being inner to the Manomaya, Manomaya being inner to the Pranamaya, and so on. So
Mm-hmm.
Vijnanamaya is to do with the values we hold, the ideals we hold for life. What is the centralizing idea that I lead my life by?
Okay.
That's Vijnanamaya. And Anandamaya is the very core of our being, which is to do with bliss. And that's actually the primary principal idea of Indian knowledge system itself, which is to say that we are of bliss, we are of joy. That's our nature, and that's the pursuit to go back to. So, this is a blueprint that has been given by the ancient seers. Now, coming to the classroom application of this, I see a few ways.
Mm-hmm.
Coming back to the ratio proportion one. So,
Mm-hmm.
picking this topic, what is an Annamaya way to look at it? How can I apply ratios and proportion in my daily life through the objects around me? So,
Mm-hmm.
let's say we take a roti. How do we divide this roti amongst four people?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so on and so. How do we simulate various situations?
Mm-hmm.
So using daily objects, we can try and understand ratio proportions.
Mm-hmm.
When we come to measurement, a body is actually a measurement tool. We don't need scale. Actually, we can measure with finger, arm, fingers, hand span, etc. We do a lot of this, but here is a worldview or a blueprint which helps us make sense of which dimension of the child I'm working on. Right now, coming to the pranamaya, can I make an intervention where children work collaboratively? There is some idea exchange, some communication going on, negotiation. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say I give 20 rupee money, let's say toy money,
Mm,
and they need to divide it amongst five people. They
mhm,
do that. Then I add one more person to their group, and
mm,
then there is some money left with. What do they do? How do they negotiate,
mhm,
etc. So there is some energy transfer there and transmission that happens. So
mhm,
that I see as probably working on the pranamaya,
mhm,
and then stepping back a bit and then prompting them to think,
mhm,
okay, while you were doing these activities, what were you sensing into? What were your thoughts? What were you feeling? Did you ask yourself some question when someone said that? How did you feel? These
mhm,
are some prompts which could help them come in touch with their substance of the mind during those activities,
mhm,
touching the manomaya. So, and then Vijnanamaya, if we were to look at it, is how we can connect it to some central idea where, let's say, four pieces of a roti putting together will become one whole, right? So, a central idea of how ratio and proportion can lead to something of applicability in life. Even if we speak of proportion, is proportion is not just to do with math for
mhm.
exams in order to score marks. It's in
It
life
also,
as well.
absolutely.
How much I eat, when I eat, how much I speak when I speak, even how I relate to a friend. Of course, a friend is someone dear, but let's say if they are doing something questionable, do I still help them just because they are a friend? Or what is my sense of proportion in
Mhm,
the way I interact and relate with people?
mhm,
Right? So these are ways in which we can touch something deeper,
mhm,
something more nuanced, and
mhm,
that I feel is Vijnanamaya. And
mhm,
in my understanding, I think Anandamaya is something that unfolds if
mhm,
we do these things, and if the environment is conducive. Anandamaya is a natural outcome of what we are trying to do in the classroom.
mhm.
So
I
this
think
is,
just the joy of learning, just the
Yes.
joy of discovering something for the first time. It might be something that one already knows, but
Mhm,
recognition,
mhm,
or in a sense, just the joy of finding out something, the joy of being itself. I think we
mhm.
miss that in our learning spaces.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
So
So,
we need
yeah.
to bring.
while you were speaking, there are so many overlaps with IB because,
Mhm.
while you're speaking, I'm just noting down the things. So, when you talked about group work, right, there's something
Yeah.
called ability grouping that we talk about when they are not just collaborating about the knowledge, they are actually talking about who's going to do the research, who's going to do
Yes.
the speaking, who's going to do the presentation digitally. So, that is the ability grouping that we talk about. When you talked about feelings, right, in
Mm,
in IB and IGCSE or in international education, they talk about reflections, right?
Yes.
After you do some activity, you are supposed to give in reflections, which are
Yeah.
mapped to ATL skills, which are approaches to learning skills. Right.
Yeah.
So how did you grow? How did you progress? What was your growth mindset? So
Yeah.
it's called social emotional learning actually also can kind of, overlap and come in. When you talked about application, thematic understanding of how the thematic learning or thematic projects that IB and IGCSE we take up. So there are so many overlaps. I mean, it's so easily integratable because we already are doing it, but we don't know about the
Exactly.
India. Yeah. And when you talked about whether if they are not my friends, whether I should actually,
Yeah.
that's ethics that we talk about, right? So
Yeah.
ethical. So amazingly, I'm just I'm getting so many ideas that I can actually talk about. But how is it that a teacher can so we talk about it in the IB perspective. Maybe teachers who are already doing the international education, they have to because it's the demand of the curriculum. But how
Yeah.
do you how would teachers who are currently in the Indian school system, because it's not mandatory for them as of now, but they are invested in it, and I'm sure CBSE is doing a lot of things. But how do you
mm.
very gradually integrate it in the teaching? Where should they start? The content pedagogy mindset. How do they start without really getting them overwhelmed? Because any change is overwhelming, to be honest. So how do you get along with it? So
So I think very rightfully shared, Tanyaji, that any change is very overwhelming, very lot of resistance that one faces.
Absolutely.
But if I were to just see this as something that is already there within me,
Mm,
I'm just, in a sense, discovering it, giving it a better lens, attributing it to this land,
mhm.
and also going a bit deeper than what I have been doing until now. So that it doesn't feel like I'm completely replacing what I am doing
Yes,
until now.
yes.
It is not a sense of a fracture, it is not a sense of a division from what I am doing already. If
Mhm,
teachers can also begin to see
mhm,
that it's not a departure,
mhm,
some things definitely are the world views, from a reductionist versus a holistic, those are, there are some clear differences, yes, but innately any teacher will have some of these things in their classroom already. So
yes.
maybe what we can initially highlight are similarities, like you just shared, right?
Mhm,
Similarities of approaches that one is already bringing on in their classroom.
mhm,
Another thing is, IKS,
mhm,
there are three levels at which we can have a sense of integration.
mhm,
One is the worldview, the larger worldview, the perspective, which is what we were talking about, right? The darshana, the
mhm,
ultimate understanding of reality itself, right? That is one level. Another level is how does that worldview come into the classroom through pedagogy?
mm.
What are some interesting ways that I can stay in tune with that?
Absolutely.
And then the last, very important, are also some content pieces of IKS, like very hardcore content pieces
Mhm,
that not just inform the worldview but also help me go deeper into current areas of subjects.
mm,
Also, help me see things beyond what I'm already seeing. So, content is also there. So, there's worldview, there's pedagogy, there's content.
mhm,
What we have seen in whatever little work that we have done, if we directly start with worldview, one feels, oh no, this is too much to take.
right.
It's an interesting way to begin with IKS pedagogies.
Okay.
And when I say pedagogies,
Mhm,
I am very sure we already do a lot of it. We probably don't know that, these were one of the finest ways in which, the Indian land would also learn and teach. Some of them would be the inquiry method, the
mm.
inquiry based method. Most of our Upanishads, actually, all of our Upanishads,
Yes.
uh, no teacher will start speaking if there wasn't a question from a student.
Imagine.
Right?
Mhm,
And it is between question and answer that learning is really happening. There is no real syllabus,
mm,
right? So the
mm,
entire inquiry based method
mhm,
is one important pedagogy in IKS. Another thing is the story method, the
mm,
storytelling method. Um, if you look at it, some of the Vedic sort of aphorisms,
mhm,
it's not so easy for many of us of different orientations to directly gulp it,
mhm,
but the same sort of formula, when
mm,
it is presented through a beautiful story, we nicely drink it, we can like be with it.
mm.
There's no hindrance in understanding what that concept is.
Right,
So storytelling as a pedagogy,
right.
right? Also bring the multidisciplinary sort of engagement with any idea. I think
Mm,
this is also yet another thing that IKS has always insisted. If you had to really understand, let's say if you were to be an architect in
mhm,
the Indian tradition,
mhm,
you would have to not just understand biology,
mhm,
you would also have to understand music, you
mhm,
would also have to get a sense of metallurgy, which means you would also have to understand mathematics. So
mm,
there was never a sense of siloed subjects, it was inherently cross disciplinary.
Yes.
So all of these things, I think easily we can bring in into our classrooms, Tanya ji.
Mhm.
If I may just add a quick
Yes.
point,
Yes.
of course, we all do want to work on the present subjects so that we achieve academic goals.
Mm-hmm.
But in that pursuit, I think one very critical layer we forget is
Mm-hmm.
the inner being of the child, which is where I think IKS can really contribute.
Yes.
Today, we force fit mental health and all sorts of interventions after we have done all the wrong
Context.
things,
Context.
all the harm we have done, and then we're looking to, sort of reduce the collateral
Salvage
damage.
the situation. Yes.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Exactly. So, how can we start looking at the child in a different way, the learning process in a different way, ourselves engaging in it through a different lens so that the process itself is less anxiety driven, less stressful, and
Mm-hmm.
more, let's say, compassion, love,
Mm-hmm.
and, joy driven? I think that has always been a pursuit of IKS. I think that definitely is an important perspective to take here.
A child as a whole, right? The inner being of a child. As teachers, we understand it, but I'm sure you also would agree that they are currently under-addressed in the mainstream education. Also, something that I find very, I don't know how you are managing it, but the school is answerable to parents, right? So how do you convince parents of unlearning the school system that is now and maybe investing in the child as a whole? And because all parents in the Indian system, all middle class parents, they are only looking at a job, a security, right? So even if they have an appreciation of the child as a whole, but to unlearn what is the structure of the school and invest in IKS, how do you manage that? And what are the things
Yeah.
that are under addressed in a child, if we could talk about, and then we'll talk about the Gurukul system. Yeah.
Sure, sure. Before I maybe take the perch of what IKS says about this,
Mhm.
what is happening right now?
Mhm.
We see the era of AI already, coming in not just waves, probably in tsunami,
Yeah.
and
Not
there is
even
a
aware
constant
of
need.
where it is. We are not even aware of
Exactly.
where it is. Yes.
Every day I come up with new tools and softwares that can really, I don't know, it can't even imagine this probably 2 years back. So with this world kind of evolving at this rate,
Mhm.
we need to start asking questions around what is really going to help my child be relevant in the future. Where are we today? What is the present context? And
Mhm.
how do I look at the future?
Mhm.
And how does the child stay relevant? This
Mhm.
is a core question I
Mhm.
think everybody has already started asking. So we try and offer that perspective first.
Okay.
Second, we have something called the 21st century skills.
Mhm.
People are gung ho about it. There, we speak about skills again. It's
Mhm.
not about some theory, it's not about some subject. We're
Mhm.
speaking about critical thinking, communication, and all of that, right? So, again, why are we saying it's 21st century? Because it's this century's need and the
Mhm.
most relevant thing for now. And
Mhm.
then we also have World Economic Forum, which comes up with this job reports.
Yes,
And by
2030.
2030,
Mm.
what are the most important skills?
Mhm.
I think, and by the time I quote some of these, some of the parents are already antennas up, right? Because we are putting modern, studies and examples,
Right.
and nothing to do with IKS just yet.
Right.
So, having said that, what the IKS does is it works on the faculty of mind, it works on the inner faculties,
Mhm.
because the pursuit is not just the subject, but the learner as well.
Mhm.
So, learning or the process of learning has three aspects:
Mhm.
the subject that I'm studying,
Mhm.
the in the world or something to do with life,
Mhm.
the process of learning itself,
Mhm.
and the learner.
Mhm.
Third most and the most important aspect is the learner itself.
Mhm.
And somewhere, along the time, we have forgotten to study the learner. But that has been the core question of IKS,
Right.
which is what we refer to as something called as Swadharma.
Mhm.
Sri Aurobindo also speaks about it so beautifully. One of the principles he says is every child is unique, and we cannot fit children in pre-existing molds. Just like how the same species of flowers are not the same,
Mm-hmm.
each flower in the same species is different.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, children are. They blossom in different ways, they flower in different ways. So, that, first of all, I think that awareness, that acceptance should be sensitized.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying we are there yet. There is a lot of work to be done
Lot.
because we do sense so much feverishness, this sentiment that what about job, what about career, exist a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is where I think the frames itself, the previous era's frames, I don't think will no longer exist after a few more years. We
Mm-hmm.
hear Elon Musk say there won't be jobs anymore,
The,
so on
min-
and so forth. So
the minimum
yeah,
pay concept, I'm yet to wrap my brains around it. I don't know how that's going to
exactly.
work.
And world is becoming flatter and flatter.
Mm,
So how are we going to apply the same frames for a time which is completely different?
mm,
I can only end with a rhetoric there,
mm.
and it's for all of us to wonder and pursue this question.